As I was returning home one afternoon, the way the light was illuminating this old chapel really caught my attention, and I just had to stop and take a quick photo to use as reference for later. And that is really the inspiration behind this painting. The golden light as it was entering through the gate and illuminating the inside of this beautiful old chapel is what really inspired me to create this miniature painting, and I will be creating larger versions later on. I begin my painting process with some undertones. For the underpainting, I'm going to use only burnt umber, which is a brown tone, and I'm going to apply thin layers of paint mostly. The purpose of the underpainting is to indicate where I'm going to have darks and highlights. It is not to paint the entire painting accurately, it is just to give me an indication so that I know where I'm going to be working on with darker tones and where I'm going to be working with lighter tones. And to make my work easier, I have converted the reference photo to sepia tones. Having it in monochromatic tones helps me interpret where the lights and the shadows are. I am applying thin layers of paint for the lighter tones, and where I need my tones to be darker, I'm using thicker paint. And those are mostly washes of color. What you may notice is that even the sky appears much darker than the illuminated part of the building. That is because this was during sunset, and from the point of view of the observer, I have my back to the sun, and this is the part of the sky which is the darkest blue, while the limestone of the chapel is reflecting the sunlight. So I'm going to go over the entire canvas, including the sky. Here I'm going over the sky, just a few washes of color, and I'm going to leave the lightest part of the painting mostly in white and a bit of color. I'm not too focused on details. I'm mainly painting spots of color where I see shadows, and where I see highlights I leave the white of the canvas to show through. Because I'm using wet paint, it's still quite easy to blend, but this has more of a watercolor look to it, and it's really just the underpainting. When I start adding the colors, I'm going to be working with much thicker paint. The second stage of the painting is the sky. For the sky, I'm using some cerulean blue mixed with some ivory and some powder blue, which is a lighter blue, and I'm blending it from dark to light and applying the lightest colors towards the horizon. I'm not painting over the building, just gently applying brush strokes of color around it. But if I go over it, it doesn't really matter. Now I'm moving on to the shaded areas of the building. I'm starting with this wall, and this wall is not actually the darkest area. It has some reflected light, which is why I'm going to use warm tones. Together with the warm tones, I'm also using a bit of blue, because in general here the blue in the shadows is coming from the blue sky, which is being reflected in the shaded areas. And I'm also using the brown color to illustrate the moldy stains on the rock. For the pavement, as you can see, I'm applying a lot more blue because it is much darker and it is reflecting the blue sky above it. And the same will apply for the wall, as well as the clothes of the nun. The blue which I'm using for the shadows is called royal blue, and it is from the professional acrylics collection. Once again, I'm applying patches of color. I'm not focusing on every detail. First of all, because I want to create an impressionist loose style, and I want the brush strokes and the patches of color to illustrate the shape and just to suggest the shapes of the building and the highlights and the shadows. And also remember that when we're looking at a very large building from a distance, we don't see all the details at the same time. We may see some ornaments and appreciate the beauty of the architecture, but usually that is if we are focused on one specific area. We don't see everything on focus at the same time, even if our eyes are good. Now you may notice that I'm painting quite quickly. This is of course because the video is sped up, on average about 4 to 8 times. And of course it would be helpful if we could paint so fast in acrylics, but no, this is not in real time. But nevertheless, I still have to paint quite fast if I want to create this impressionist loose style of painting which resembles oil paint. because unlike oil, acrylic dries very fast, and depending on the scale of your work, you have to be able to blend everything in one go within a few minutes or seconds. You can always go back and add another layer, but you cannot blend with the older layer. Unlike with oil paint, where you can come back in a day or two and blend some more and adjust the layers you already have. So I added quite a bit of blue with the brown for the shaded area, and the side of the wall is also not completely dark. It has some reflected light from the surrounding buildings, so I'm adding warm colors. And once again, I'm just suggesting the shapes, and I want my brush strokes to translate into the interpretation of shapes and color as we would look at the building from a distance. I don't want my painting to look like an architectural sketch. I want to capture the atmosphere of the moment. Now I'm beginning to add the lighter tones. Once again, I'm working from dark to light because acrylics is a thick medium. You can use it in various ways, but here I'm using it like oils. So I'm, of course, applying thick paint now. It is not exactly impasto, but it is quite thick. I'm not going to leave any blank parts of the canvas. I'm going to paint everything in light color. So I'm gradually building it up from dark to light. Here is a tip if you want the colors to blend and create a gradient. You have to work quite fast before the paint underneath has dried up. And if you want to create a highlight, you can paint over it once the paint has dried. The highlights will stay on top and they will not blend with the color underneath. And while I said that I don't want to paint every detail, I do want to preserve some accuracy of the shapes. It is a very small canvas and it is quite challenging. At the same time, I don't want the geometry of the building to be completely off. There is a gate here, which is not really visible in the photo. I know that it's there. I don't think you can see it very well. It is a metal gate, and I'm not going to paint it in great detail. I will only use a thin brush later on to suggest the metal bars, as well as the bars on the other openings. The painting process is quite time consuming, even on such a small scale. This is the standard art cards size, which is 4.6 centimeters times 8.9, or 2.5 inches times 3.5 inches. And normally it is expected that such artworks are quick to produce and quite inexpensive. The reality is that it really depends what kind of medium you're using, how much detail you have, how ambitious the project is, and a painting such as this one takes anything from 4 to 6 hours. And I'm saying this as an experienced person, as an experienced artist. There isn't really a quick way to make such art. And remember, if you're interested, you can always watch the video in different speeds. This is anything from 4 to 8 times the real speed, but you can adjust the playback speed. Here I'm making a progress towards the highlights, and that for me is the most exciting part of the painting. First of all, because most of the difficult work is already done, and I can see how the painting is beginning to come alive, and the highlights are what really makes it look three-dimensional. Just a bit of blue here and there to correct the shapes of the gate. There are some beautiful ornaments at the top. The dark here is not just the shadow, it is also the mold on the limestone, and that is what makes it look authentic. I'm using lighter tones for the facade. Here I'm using a very thin brush to add some details here and there to suggest the shapes of the ornaments as well as the cross at the top and all the corners. I'm adding the shades first because I'm going to gradually build up the color from dark to light, and I'm using light tones for the facade of the chapel. And this beautiful old chapel is in Rabat in Malta. It's on a busy road, so I was lucky to manage to capture a few photos while the beauty of the chapel was not obstructed by traffic, and only the nun walked on the pavement conveniently to add to the atmosphere. For the lighter tones, I'm still going to mix with some ivory. I'm going to mix the color and blend it in. And only the highlights I'm going to use pure ivory. I prefer it over white because it is softer and warmer. And whenever I need my atmosphere to be warm, I prefer to use warm white color. I find the titanium white to be very good if you need very bright highlights, but it is a bit cold, and I prefer the ivory, especially in acrylics. It is just much warmer and softer. In my opinion, the painting is complete when I can feel the atmosphere the way that I felt it when I was inspired by the moment, by the original moment when I was there. Now I'm finishing off the nun. I'm using mostly blue for her clothes, which are in the shade. And now my favorite part, adding the sunlight as it is reflected through the gate. And the painting is almost done. So this is almost done, and I'm about to reveal the final result. Just a few more final touches, and here it is. If you've made it so far, thank you for watching. If you found this useful, you're welcome to subscribe if you want to. I will be doing a bigger version of this painting. I think I will try this in watercolor and see how it goes. And I will probably do an oil painting, but at a later stage. And I have a few other references from the same, so there will be slight variations in the composition. I'm not going to copy exactly the same painting, but it will be interesting to see how the different paintings compare.